welcome to the deep dive. You send us your sources, and we dig into them, pull out the key stuff to get you up to speed fast.
That's the idea.
Today we're looking at something pretty fascinating, the backstory of a major space mission, well, actually a couple of potential missions. We're exploring these proposals based on the documents you shared.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to focus on the histories of these two European astrometry missions, DIVA and Gaia, how they kind of intertwined and what else was happening globally. It's quite a story, really.
Yeah.
Ambition, technology, strategy.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to get a handle on what was driving these ideas. You know, the designs, the competition, what ultimately happened.
Right.
It really shows how these big science ideas travel from, well, from concept to reality. Or sometimes.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Sometimes not.
Okay, so let's get into it. The sources point out that even before the Hipparcos catalog landed, which was what, around 95?
Yeah, mid-90s.
Even before that, there was already this global interest in, like, the next step for mapping stars.
Absolutely. Hipparcos was huge, obviously, but it definitely sparked this appetite for more precision, more stars.
And it wasn't just Europe thinking about this.
Oh, no, not at all. Your sources show this real flurry of activity, ideas popping up in the U.S., Russia, Japan, all around the same time.
Wow. So what were they focused on, these early ideas?
Well, in the U.S., you had some really ambitious concepts. Points, for instance, was aiming for super high precision on just a few stars, maybe find planets.
Okay.
Then FAME, which was more like a Hipparcos successor, a survey mission, and SIM, the space interferometry mission. That one was, wow, incredibly ambitious.
Also.
Aiming for sub-microarcsecond accuracy, using interferometry, a long baseline in space. I mean, the precision was supposed to be just phenomenal, like spotting something tiny from incredibly far away.
Sub-microarcseconds. That's hard to even grasp. But these U.S. plans, they didn't all happen, did they?
No, they ran into roadblocks. SIM, for example, the tech challenges were immense. Keeping everything stable over that distance in space, hugely difficult. Led to cost issues, and, well, it eventually got canceled. FAME got further along, but didn't get the final green light either. So lots of ideas, lots of ambition, but actually getting a mission funded and built, that's another story.
A familiar story in space science, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And the other countries, Russia, Japan.
Yeah, similar themes. Russia had ideas like AIST, kind of a Hipparcos follow-up, and some others. But, you know, the economic situation there in the 90s.
Right, that must have hit their space program hard.
It really did. It made funding these big, long-term projects very, very tough. Japan seemed to be taking maybe a more step-by-step approach with their Jasmine series of missions, building up capability over time.
So a real global mix of grand plans and practical hurdles. But like we said, we're zeroing in on Europe today, specifically DIVA and Gaia. These seem to have really gathered steam.
They did. And to get the DIVA context, we actually need to step back just a tiny bit to 93. ESA put out a call for medium mission ideas.
And 3, wasn't it?
That's the one. And Eric Hegg and Leonard Lindegren proposed Roemer. Basically a Hipparcos follow-on, but crucially using CCDs.
Ah, CCDs.
Yeah.
The digital sensors. It's funny, you mentioned that they were looked at for Hipparcos way back, like early 80s.
Around 82, yeah.
But deemed too immature back then. Just a decade later, they're the go-to tech. Shows how fast things move.
Doesn't it just? So Roemer was aiming for much better accuracy than Hipparcos. It was well rated scientifically, but ultimately ESA chose what became the Planck mission instead, cosmic microwave background study.
Okay, so Roemer didn't fly, but it sounds like it set the stage.
It definitely did. It kept the astrometry conversation going, and out of that environment, the Gaia concept started to really take shape. Lindegren again, Michael Perryman too, much bigger vision.
And Gaia eventually got selected by ESA in 2000, right?
Correct. But, and this is key, running alongside this Gaia development, another idea was brewing.
DIVA.
Right, DIVA. This came out of Germany, coordinated by Siegfried Reuser in Heidelberg around 95, proposed to the German Space Agency, DORA, back then, later DLR.
And the full name gives it away a bit, doesn't it? Deutsches Interferometer. Something, something.
Exactly. Deutsches Interferometer for Vielkanal-Photometrie und Astrometrie. German Interferometer for multicolor photometry and astrometry. Very clearly national initially.
Which, as you hinted, becomes important later with funding. So DIA, then DLR, was the target, aiming for a launch maybe mid-2000s.
Yeah, if things went smoothly, maybe 2004 was the initial thought. And DIVA had a specific role in mind.
Which was?
Essentially filling the gap. Hipparcos got the bright nearby stars. Gaia was aiming for, well, 1 billion stars, much fainter further out. DIVA was meant to cover the middle ground.
Okay, so bridging Hipparcos and Gaia, how many stars was DIVA targeting?
Around 30 million down to magnitude 15. So yeah, way more than Hipparcos' 100,000 or so, but definitely less ambitious in sheer numbers than Gaia.
And the precision, better than Hipparcos.
Oh yes, for brighter stars, say magnitude 9, they were aiming for about 0.2 milliarc seconds in position, parallax, proper motion, a really solid improvement.
And they thought they could do this cheaper than Hipparcos because of tech advances.
That was the argument. Technology had moved on. And interestingly, that initial DIVA design, like early Gaia ideas, was actually based on interferometry.
Interferometer in the name.
Right, using something called dispersed fringes. The idea was to get color information, photometry, at the same time as the position, sort of measuring the spectrum while you measure the angle.
Okay, this is where it gets juicy. 2 European missions, DIVA and Gaia, bubbling up around the same time. Must have been some interesting interactions, competition.
Oh, absolutely. You've put your finger on it. The DIVA proponents, they genuinely saw it as scientifically vital. Good science, deliverable sooner than Gaia, perhaps?
Makes sense.
And they also framed it strategically as insurance for Europe. You know, if Gaia didn't get picked by ESA, DIVA would keep Europe in the high-precision astrometry game. Plus, it keeps the expertise alive, builds skills for Gaia later, potentially.
Right, keep the teams working, maintain that leadership edge. But I imagine the Gaia folks saw it a bit differently.
Well, yeah. From the Gaia perspective, while everyone agreed more astrometry was good, DIVA looked like a competitor.
For money and people.
Exactly. Limited funds, both at the national level in Germany, DLR, and potentially ESA level too.
Wow.
And a limited pool of experts, right? Scientists, engineers with this very specific skill set. Could DIVA pull resources away from the bigger Gaia effort? That was the concern.
The classic dilemma in big science funding.
Mm.
And then politics enters the fray. There was this interaction in '98 with ESA's science director, Bonnet.
Roger Maurice Bonnet, yes,
Yeah.
a key moment. He apparently wasn't keen on ESA putting money into what was essentially a national program, DIVA.
Why not?
His thinking, according to the sources, was more strategic, more European. Discouraging direct ESA funding for a national mission like DIVA, his suggestion was, look, Germany should put more money into Gaia, maybe help launch Gaia sooner.
Consolidate the European effort.
Precisely. Consolidate resources, boost the big ESA mission, and there was likely a competitive angle too. Keep Europe ahead of the U.S. efforts, like FAME.
FAME again. You mentioned FAME borrowed ideas from Hipparcos and Gaia.
It did, yeah. And there's even been some whispers about maybe FAME and DIVA collaborating. Bonnet probably wanted to avoid a situation where a U.S.-European project overshadowed a purely ESA one like Gaia. A unified, strong European Gaia was the goal.
Okay, so ESA leadership is pushing for Gaia consolidation. Meanwhile, back in Germany, DLR finishes its DIVA study late '98. They think it's doable technically.
Technically, yes, they seemed confident, but the funding wasn't nailed down, and the shadow of the U.S. FAME mission was looming. The feeling was, if FAME really gets going with U.S. funding, DIVA's chances look much slimmer.
Which brings us right into 1999-2000, crunch time.
Absolutely. October '99, big news. The U.S. FAME mission gets approved for further study. That sent ripples, definitely.
Made it seem much more real, a direct threat.
Perceived that way, yeah. A threat to both DIVA and potentially Gaia's political support. The Gaia Advisory Group apparently discussed this internally, like, could FAME weaken the case for Gaia?
And collaboration wasn't really on the table, FAME Gaia.
Doesn't seem like there was much enthusiasm for that, no. The thinking in the Gaia camp was more like, let's get Gaia launched sooner, maybe 2009, and then FAME becomes less of a big deal.
Okay. While all this is happening, what's DLR doing with DIVA?
Well, January 2000, DLR actually states its preference for DIVA over Gaia as Germany's next national mission, citing things like German industry involvement, national science policy.
Wow, okay. Directly favoring the national project over the big ESA one. That must have caused some waves.
You bet. And you had key figures like Eric Hugg, the Danish astrometry pioneer, coming out strongly for Gaia, saying he couldn't work on both. That carries weight.
Yeah, definitely.
The Gaia team was also worried about DLR's timeline. They were planning to select DIVA in August 2000, just before ESA made its big mission selection.
Bad timing. Could look like Germany was preempting ESA's decision.
Exactly, that was the fear. So ESA kind of stepped in, brought in James Binney, a respected astronomer, to assess all the missions, DIVA, Gaia, FAME, SIM, for a big meeting in May 2000.
Trying to get an objective overview.
Right. And Roemer, the DIVA lead, agreed to postpone their final decision until after that assessment. acknowledging the bigger picture, perhaps.
So what was the feeling by mid-2000?
The consensus seemed to be shifting. Fame, okay, maybe it keeps the field hot internationally, doesn't directly drain European resources. But DIVA, starting to look like it could disrupt a unified European push for Gaia.
The feeling was maybe focus everything on Gaia for the biggest impact.
That seemed to be the emerging view. Better to pool European efforts on the really ambitious mission?
Then September 2000, DLR makes its recommendation. DIVA is the choice for the next national mission, but with a catch.
A huge catch. They recommended DIVA, yes, but only if 50% of the funding came from elsewhere, like from the German federal states.
That's a massive hurdle to clear, finding half the budget externally.
A very tough ask. And then just weeks later, October 12th, 2000.
The big one. ESA's Science Program Committee makes its choice.
And they selected Gaia.
Boom. Huge for Gaia. You'd think that would be the end for DIVA.
Not quite immediately. Amazingly, DIVA development continued in parallel for a bit. They even had a big joint workshop in Heidelberg, April 2001. DIVA folks, Gaia folks, discussing technical stuff.
Still collaborating, or at least talking.
Seems like it. Optical design, attitude control, things relevant to both. The DIVA team was still aiming for that mid-2004 launch target.
But they still needed that money, the external funding, specifically from ESA.
Yep, that 50% chump. They needed about 15 million euros from ESA to make it fly. They formally requested it.
And how did that go down in ESA?
Yeah. Not well. November 2001, both the Astronomy Working Group and the Space Science Advisory Committee gave it a thumbs down, a negative recommendation on the funding request.
Ouch. That must have hurt DIVA's chances badly.
It was pretty much the writing on the wall. Then in March 2002, DLR's own executive committee made the call. No go for DIVA in the near term, 2003-2005 timeframe.
Citing money trouble.
Financial reasons, yeah.
Right.
They officially called it a delay, not a cancellation, but, you know.
The outlook wasn't good. Was there any last attempt?
One final push, it seems. October 2002, German industry reps made a high-level appeal directly at ESA's tech center, asking for that ESA funding for DIVA.
A last-ditch effort.
It was, but on November 5th, 2002, the ESA Science Program Committee gave the final answer: no ESA funding for DIVA.
And that was it. The end of the road for DIVA.
That was effectively the end. A real shame for the team, undoubtedly, after all that work. But from a broader perspective, it meant European astrometry efforts were now fully consolidated behind Gaia.
Which, as we know now, turned out to be spectacularly successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a simple path to get there.
No, definitely not. What a story. Ambition, tech hurdles, national versus European priorities, funding realities. It's all in there. This deep dive really shows that complex web behind big space science. It's not just about having a great idea.
Not at all.
Where
Competition, collaboration, strategy, timing. So many factors shape which missions actually make it off the drawing board and into space.
it really makes you think, doesn't it? You know, considering what DIVA was designed for, that middle ground between Hipparcos and Gaia, what if both had flown? What would astronomy look like now if we'd had both DIVA and Gaia operating, collecting that complementary data? Would certain discoveries have happened faster? Or maybe different discoveries altogether?
That's a really interesting what if. It highlights those big strategic choices, the trade-offs you inevitably have to make when you're planning these massive, expensive, long-term projects. There's rarely enough resource to do everything.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks for digging into these sources with us. A really great deep dive.